Trump walked into the hearing expecting it to be routine, but Jasmine Crockett's piercing question shattered his composure. The atmosphere in the room was heavy even before anyone spoke. It was a Monday morning in late September, and the nation's attention was focused on room 2140, one of the Rayburn House office building in Washington. Cameras were everywhere, and cable news banners had already turned red. The president, still serving his second term, was about to testify in a highly publicized congressional hearing, defending his most divisive executive order yet, one that proposed cutting federal funding to sanctuary cities and revoking certain birthright protections. Jasmine Crockett sat at the end of the row, a pen resting against her chin. She didn't appear nervous. If anything, she seemed patient, as if she already knew what was coming and was simply waiting for her cue. She wore a burnt orange blazer and maintained a steely expression that didn't waver as aides whispered around her and staffers rushed to finalize last-minute details. President Trump entered 10 minutes late, flanked by Secret Service and a trail of tense-looking advisors. He wore a navy suit and a red tie, his expression unreadable at first glance, but the cameras caught the subtle signs of strain. The puff under his eyes, the clenched jaw, the hurried way he moved toward the table. The chair called the hearing to order. "Mr. President, thank you for appearing today." The chair began. Trump leaned into the microphone. "Glad to be here. I think we're going to clear some things up today. A lot of lies out there, a lot of dishonest people." The crowd behind the press barrier shifted, with a few journalists raising their eyebrows but staying silent. The first round of questions was standard policy talk, legal language, rebuttals. Trump did what he always did. He deflected, redirected, and sprinkled in sound bites that would play well on certain networks by dinner time. But then it was Representative Crockett's turn. When her name was called, she adjusted the microphone slowly and spoke without looking at her notes. "Mr. President," she began, her voice steady, "you've insisted that this executive order is about security, but security for whom?" Trump raised an eyebrow. "For the American people, all of them," he replied. Crockett tilted her head slightly. "And yet, your order disproportionately affects immigrants from communities that already contribute significantly to this country's economy, infrastructure, and culture. Isn't it true, sir, that your own Department of Justice warned against the language in Section 12 for its constitutional vulnerabilities?" Trump leaned forward, smirking. "You know, I expected better. This is the same recycled nonsense the fake media tries every day. I don't answer to opinions, Congresswoman. I answer to results." There was a pause, just a breath, but it was enough for everyone in the room to feel that something had shifted. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't respond immediately, letting the silence hang just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then she leaned in slightly, calm as ever. "With all due respect, sir, results don't come at the expense of the truth." A few people in the gallery murmured, and one of Trump's aides stiffened behind him. A flicker of tension crossed the president's face, quickly masked, but not unnoticed by Crockett. "Let's talk about truth," she continued. "Let's be honest about what today's really about." But Crockett wasn't just there to debate policy. She was about to press where it hurt. She adjusted her seat slightly, not out of nervousness, but control. The kind of movement someone makes when they're about to hit their mark. She had waited for this hearing, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because she knew most people in that room wouldn't ask the real questions. They'd dance around the politics. She wouldn't. "Mr. President," she said, her voice crisp but composed, "you've talked about transparency. You've campaigned on being a straight shooter, so I think it's fair to ask you to clarify some things for the American public, things that seem to contradict the very image you try to uphold." Trump glanced at his legal counsel, who gave a tight nod. He was listening now. "You've insisted again and again that your administration is unified, that your family is strong, that your leadership is stable. But I have here," she tapped the manila folder she had just pulled from her stack, "a set of internal emails, not from reporters, not from opponents, but from within your own team, your own aides." The room grew quieter than it already was. No side chatter, no coughs, just the hum of equipment and shifting camera lenses locking in. Trump tried to wave her off. "I know where this is going. Another stunt, another ambush." Crockett raised her hand, not in a dramatic gesture, but as a stop sign of clarity. "Sir, this isn't personal. These are fax emails exchanged between senior aides, discussing the First Lady's prolonged stay in West Palm Beach, separate residences, private travel arrangements, Secret Service logs showing that Mrs. Trump has spent less than 20 days total at the White House in the last 3 months. Trump leaned back, folded his arms, and scoffed. So now we're talking about my marriage. Is this Congress or Real Housewives of Washington? What a joke. But Crockett didn't let it go. The American public deserves to know whether the image you sell is real, or whether we're watching a stage show held together by scripted appearances. And a press team cleaning up behind you. A faint shuffle of feet came from the gallery. Even some of the journalists were whispering now. Trump's legal counsel was furiously scribbling notes on a pad. Crockett continued, steady as a metronome, you present your policies as reflections of your core beliefs. But if that core is fractured behind the scenes of your own household is a staged illusion, then how can we trust the way you govern? That got a reaction. Trump sat up. That's none of your damn business, he snapped. Crockett shot back. You made it our business when you campaigned on family values. When you held up your marriage as proof of your strength, you opened that door, Mr. President. He leaned toward the microphone again, his voice sharp now. You don't know anything about my marriage. Crockett didn't miss a beat. I know what your staff is saying behind your back. That did it. Trump slammed the palm of his hand on the table. A sharp, flat pop echoed through the room. You're disgusting, he shouted. This isn't what America wants. You want to talk about loyalty, integrity, look in the mirror. Crockett didn't even blink. Integrity is exactly what I'm talking about. There was a pause long enough for people to realize something rare had happened. Trump had lost his cool, and she hadn't raised her voice once. I'm not finished, she said calmly, flipping another page in her file. Because this isn't just about where the First Lady sleeps. It's about the patterns of secrecy and the lengths your administration has gone to keep the American people in the dark. Trump mumbled something under his breath, but the microphone didn't catch it. Crockett didn't seem to care. She turned. Another page. In testimony earlier this year, one of your former aides, unprompted, mentioned your increasing reliance on a small inner circle. Aides said the president had become irritable, erratic, and paranoid over leaks. That same aide also claimed you were refusing routine health checks. Trump snapped back. False, lie, all of it. Crockett's voice cut through. Then maybe you can explain why 3 separate White House aides confirmed to congressional investigators that you've required private, on-call medical attendance during your international trips, something no previous president has demanded so consistently, and that those same aides, off the record, have described the presence of personal garments not for fashion, but for function. The air snapped. A cameraman gasped. A journalist in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Trump's mouth moved, but nothing came out at first. His face was flushed. "This is shameful," he barked. "You're out of line." Crockett replied, her eyes locked on his. "You're the president. Every line affects 330 million people. You don't get to hide behind the desk anymore." But Crockett wasn't just making a point, she was drawing blood, and the president knew it. For a moment, the room just sat in silence, the kind that burns even through TV screens and live streams. You could feel it. No coughs, no camera clicks, just tension so thick it was practically physical. President Trump, who had weathered dozens of heated hearings and press confrontations, was now visibly shaken. His hands twitched, his lips pressed into a flat red line. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't grin. She just pressed on. Her voice steady like someone reading lines they'd rehearsed 1,000 times, but meant every word. "I'm not here to mock you, Mr. President," she said plainly. "I'm not interested in your private life for gossip. But when your administration demands total trust from the American people while hiding fractures, that becomes everyone's business." Trump leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "No one wants to hear this. This is trash. This is what you bring to the floor." Crockett replied, direct and sharp, "People don't trust you. They've been asked to believe one thing while watching something very different. So yes, I'm going to say it out loud." She glanced at her folder once more, not for effect, but clarity. "In April, your team delayed a scheduled summit in Brussels. The official statement blamed security logistics, but emails show internal. Memos citing an unplanned medical delay, the term used, presidential garment concerns. I'd like clarification on what that means." Trump stared at her, not blinking, not speaking. She waited. "Do you deny that medical staff traveling with you were instructed to remain on standby overnight due to an incident on Air Force One?" Still no response, so she added, "Because the former stewards on that flight gave statements. They said Medical staff were summoned after an unspecified accident occurred during your return from Brussels. Both claimed the issue was cleaned up quickly without formal documentation under direct orders. From your chief of staff, the color in Trump's face deepened, not red like anger, but blotched and uneven. The way someone's skin changes when their emotions and blood pressure fight for control. I'm not going to sit here and entertain sick lies from sick people, he said finally, his voice raw. You're a fraud. You were sent here to embarrass the presidency. Crockett didn't flinch. No, Mr. President, I was elected to protect it. Gasps followed, not theatrical ones, but genuine, because the moment had flipped. Trump's voice cracked. Crockett's DID in single quotes T. Millions of Americans watching from their couches, offices, airports, or wherever they were could feel it. Representative Luis Biza, sitting the seats over, cleared his throat and tried to speak, but Crockett raised her finger politely, still holding the floor. Let me be clear about something, she said, her tone still balanced. No one is mocking medical needs. What's disgraceful is the cover-up, the denial, the performance. If there's a condition, you're entitled to privacy, but not at the expense of lying to the public, rewriting policy to distract from it, and punishing whistleblowers who simply wanted honesty. Trump slammed his hand down again. Lies. You people are disgusting. You don't deserve this room. But the cameras didn't cut away. Crockett leaned slightly forward. You've made your name on humiliating people, Mr. President. From cable news anchors to gold star families, from disabled reporters to your own cabinet. And now, when someone holds a mirror to your face, you call it an ambush. Trump looked to the committee chair, his voice hoarse. She's out of order. The chair, Representative Clive Arden, was flipping through the procedural binder. Representative Crockett has the floor under direct inquiry, he muttered, eyes scanning. She may continue. That sealed it. Trump sank slightly into his chair, muttering to his lawyer beside him. Crockett continued, this time shifting her tone to quieter and slower. I know people watching this will ask why it matters. Why bring it up? Here's why. It's not about shame. It's about accountability. The office you hold carries weight. And if you're no longer physically or mentally capable of carrying that weight with transparency and composure, then the country deserves to know. She closed the folder, hands resting lightly on top. Americans have endured for years of distraction, for years of culture wars and shouting. Today, they saw something else, a conversation, a moment where power didn't get the last word. For the first time in the hearing, Trump said nothing. His eyes darted between the cameras and the committee members. He wasn't in control of the room anymore, and he knew it. But the moment wasn't over, because Crockett's words weren't just echoing in that room. They were spreading far beyond it. Within minutes, clips of the exchange began surfacing. Online, CNN had already broken from the live feed to a breaking news panel. MSNBC was replaying Crockett's closing line on loop. Fox News tried to redirect attention to the earlier economic questions, but the internet had moved on. TikTok was flooded with reactions, edits, memes, and hashtags. In under 30 minutes, hashtag Crockett Claps Back was trending worldwide. Inside the chamber, the hearing wasn't over, not officially. Trump sat hunched, slightly whispering to his counsel. His mic was muted, but his body language was loud, tense shoulders, unsteady hands, a half sleeve of sweat visible beneath the dark blue fabric of his suit. He had spoken in front of the nation hundreds of times before, but this was different. He wasn't in control anymore, and the room could feel it. Representative Biza tried to pivot with a question about border infrastructure, but Trump waved it off with an impatient flick of his hand. Can we not? Can we please not pretend we're going to ignore what just happened like it's normal? That's when things started to slip. His voice, raw from yelling earlier, sounded tighter and higher pitched than usual. I come here, I sit in this chair, and I'm hit with tabloid trash allegations from bitter people I fired, twisted into this disgusting, coordinated attack. You all just sit here like it's fine. The committee chair adjusted his glasses. Mr. President, you are free to respond to the questions. Trump interrupted, his voice rising again. No, I'm not responding. I'm telling you what's really happening here. This woman, this angry little woman, thinks she's going to make a name off me by bringing my wife into it, my health. What is this? A circus? The phrase angry little woman deepened the silence in the room. Crockett didn't react. She sat still, her pen tapping gently on her notepad. But the rest of the room shifted uncomfortably. Let the record show. Crockett said quietly. The president just referred to a sitting member of Congress with misogynistic language. Trump snapped, "Oh, here we go. I'm the villain now. You try getting set up like that on live TV and see how you respond." He turned back toward the chair. "Is this how you're running things now? Letting people make up whatever they want about the president and no one bats an eye? I think the American people can decide what they believe," Crockett replied, still calm. Still centered, Trump stood up abruptly, his chair screeching backward. "You know what? Screw this hearing. It's a joke. This whole process is a joke. You're not getting anything else from me." His legal team flinched. One of his aides half stood, unsure whether to stop him or let it play out. "Sir," the chair said, clearly caught off guard, "you're under obligation to answer questions before the committee." Trump's voice bounced off the walls now. "Oh, now it's an obligation? Where was that energy when she was throwing conspiracy garbage at me? Where were the rules then?" Secret Service agents edged closer to the table. "Sir," one of them said quietly, placing a hand near the mic, "we need you to sit." "No," Trump barked. "I'm not letting them do this. I built this country back. I kept us strong. And now I'm being ambushed with personal garbage on live TV. With diapers? Really?" The word diapers hit like a dropped microphone, echoing more than it should have. Even his allies froze. Crockett said nothing. She didn't need to. One camera zoomed in on her face, still composed, not smug, not victorious, just still. Trump looked directly at her. "Now you should be ashamed." He spat, attacking a man's family, his dignity. "There's no coming back from that." Crockett finally responded, her voice quiet, almost too quiet for the mic. "You can't lose what you gave away yourself." The room stopped. Even Biza, who had been nervously clicking his pen the whole time, stopped clicking. Trump stood there for another 3 seconds. Then, realizing the cameras were still on and catching every twitch in his hands, every shake in his stance, he sat back down, not because he wanted to, but because walking out now would have looked even worse. He adjusted his mic again, cleared his throat, and said, "Let's move on." But nobody moved on, not really. What happened in that hearing didn't just stay in the moment. It ignited a fire that would burn through every news cycle for the next week. By the time the hearing ended, the media machine was already 10 steps ahead. Every major outlet had their banner headlines ready. Crockett silences Trump in stunning hearing showdown. "You can't lose what you gave away," the line that shook the chamber. President melts down on live TV, but even those felt small compared to what was happening online. Clips of Crockett's calm dismantling were stitched together with split-screen reactions from the president. On TikTok, users edited her voice over battle music, comparing her to courtroom legends and movie characters. Twitter was ablaze. Some users called her a modern-day David facing Goliath. Others dissected every second of her body language like it was game tape from a championship final. In one viral post, a political podcaster wrote, "No yelling, no insults, just receipts. Jasmine Crockett just changed the tone of how politicians confront power, and she did it in a blazer that matched her fire." Cable news was a circus that night. On MSNBC, Crockett's face filled the screen as a roundtable of analysts praised her poise. "What we witnessed today," one anchor said, "was a woman prepared not just to confront the president, but to expose the cost of showmanship without substance." CNN replayed the moment where she said, "You can't lose what you gave away yourself," and cut immediately to a commentator wiping away a grin. "That was brutal," he said, and he knew it. Even Fox News couldn't avoid it. One of their anchors tried spinning the exchange as deeply disrespectful to the office, but the footage played regardless, and viewers saw the crack in Trump's composure for themselves. Meanwhile, YouTube compilations and reaction videos surged. One creator paused at Trump's outburst and said, "You know someone's losing the argument when they stop answering and start yelling." Crockett didn't even need to raise her voice, but it wasn't just the flashy cuts and internet buzz. What hit hardest were the quieter moments, parents watching with their kids, teachers bringing up the hearing in class discussions, older voters calling into radio shows, saying they'd never seen a confrontation like that, not without shouting or chaos, just facts and control. Jasmine Crockett's office received thousands of calls. Some were hate, sure, but most of them were messages of thanks from veterans, nurses, retirees, college students, people who'd never heard of her before that morning. She stayed mostly silent for the first 24 hours, letting the reaction speak for itself. Her team posted a single statement online. Integrity doesn't need volume. Truth doesn't need theatrics. The likes climbed into the millions. The president, however, did not stay silent. Just before midnight, Trump logged onto Truth Social and typed furiously. The post went live at 12 a.m. Jasmine Crockett is a disgrace to Congress, a horrible, nasty person who lied and twisted facts. America saw through her performance, fake and phony, attacking my family on national television. She was mocked, screenshot, and dissected within seconds. But something had changed, and the replies showed it. Where once his words would have ignited a firestorm of agreement, the top comments were now filled with quotes from the hearing, with users comparing Crockett's restraint to his eruption. The contrast was undeniable. Over on late-night TV, comedians barely had to write jokes. "You know it's bad," one host said, when the guy who used to control the news cycle is begging for a reset button. Crockett's team fielded interview requests from over 40 outlets within the next day. By the end of the week, she'd been on The View, Morning Joe, Don Lemon Tonight, and even a special town hall hosted by PBS in Albuquerque. But it wasn't just about being seen, it was how she used the moment. During a live Q&A, a college student asked her, "Were you nervous confronting the president like that?" She smiled gently. "Nervous, sure, but not scared, because when you speak with facts, you don't need to yell. And when someone in power starts yelling, it usually means the facts aren't on their side." That clip alone hit 12 million views in 2 days. While Crockett's star was rising, the White House was scrambling to manage the fallout. Inside the gates of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the energy was nothing like the media storm outside. It was pure chaos. By mid-morning the day after the hearing, 3 senior staff members had already canceled their public appearances. Press Secretary Clayton Reams, normally glued to his daily briefing schedule, was nowhere to be found. In the West Wing, the hallways were tense, full of aides whispering to each other, sliding phones into their pockets, trying not to be the next person summoned upstairs. Trump had spent most of the early morning isolated in the private dining room, adjacent to the Oval Office. No media, no family, just a television screen cycling through the coverage. Everywhere he turned, Crockett's voice, her image, her sentence fragments were used as cold captions. "You can't lose what you gave away. If the truth shakes you, maybe it should," he had shouted once already at no one in particular after one of the networks played a slow-motion clip of him slamming the table. They loop it like a damn gif, like on a cartoon. His chief of staff, Nolan Crane, stood at the doorway, unsure whether to enter. "Sir, we've got Senator Whitlow holding on line 1. She wants to discuss next week's floor strategy." Trump waved him off. "Tell her to call Ivanka if she wants small talk." Crane didn't move. "She's saying donors are worried that it's going to grow into something bigger if we don't take control of the narrative." The president finally looked at him. "I am the narrative." But even he didn't believe it the way he used to. Meanwhile, in the East Wing, Melania had gone quiet. According to staff, she hadn't spoken to Trump since the night before the hearing. Her team canceled her public appearance at the Smithsonian without explanation. And when a reporter asked about her reaction to Crockett's claims, her spokesperson gave a 3-word response: "No comment today." Inside the communications wing, Press Secretary Reams finally emerged. He'd been on back-to-back strategy calls with the RNC and White House lawyers. His eyes were red, his shirt wrinkled, tie half loosened. "We need to refrain," he said to the inner circle gathered around the long table. "Focus on the policy side, the immigration order." Crockett made it personal. "We stay professional. That's our pivot." One advisor raised their hand. "What about the other stuff? The diaper claims, the health rumors?" Reams exhaled hard. "We don't engage. We call it a coordinated smear, a new low, but we don't confirm anything, not one detail." Crane leaned in. "But we can't ignore it either. You've got millions of people tweeting about the president's bathroom habits. It sounds stupid, but this thing has legs. Even the New Yorker is running with it. If we don't find a way to own the moment, it's going to define him." Trump entered just then, shoulders squared, still visibly irritated. "You want to own the moment," he said, eyes locking on Crane. "Then find me a moment of hers a mistake, a skeleton. I want everything you can find on Jasmine Crockett, everything." No one replied right away. Crane looked uncomfortable. "We've already pulled her record, sir." There's not much clean voting history, no ethics issues, no scandals, not even a messy divorce. Trump narrowed his eyes. Everyone's got something. An awkward pause followed until Reams spoke up, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. We can push back through allies. Senator Musin already agreed to float a statement on decorum that this kind of behavior undermines democracy. We run with that narrative, and we get the networks to repeat it. Trump added, they love both sides. Give them a reason. But even as they mapped out damage control, more headlines were rolling in. An op-ed from a conservative columnist in the Arizona Sentinel asked if it was time for the GOP to get serious about 2028, and that meant addressing the elephant in the room before it tramples the whole damn stage. Inside the West Wing, people began talking in hushed tones about how long this would last, not just the scandal, but the standoff. The public had seen a new image of Trump, not defiant, not composed, but cornered, and the clip had no expiration date. The worst part, Crockett wasn't just viral, she was credible. But while the president's team scrambled to find cracks in her armor, Crockett wasn't focused on defense. She was already building momentum. While the White House fumbled through crisis mode, Jasmine Crockett was walking into the kind of moment most public servants never get, the kind that can define a career or launch one into a whole new league. She wasn't holed up in her office. She wasn't avoiding the cameras. In fact, just 48 hours after the hearing, she walked straight into a packed auditorium at a town hall event in Columbus, Ohio. Of all places. There was no podium, no teleprompter, just a folding chair, a handheld mic, and her usual no-nonsense style. The crowd was already on its feet when she walked out. Some clapped, some cheered. A few held up handmade signs that read "Truth needs a voice, and you held the line." She gave a polite smile, took a seat, and gestured for them to settle down. "I'm not here to celebrate anything," she started. "I didn't go into that hearing to make headlines. I went in with questions that the American public deserved to hear answered. And I didn't raise my voice because I didn't need to. The facts did the talking." She paused, letting that hang, then added, "And I'm not done." Later that evening on The View, she sat between hosts who grilled her, but never once caught her off guard. "Did you plan the dapper line?" one asked a little eagerly. Crockett raised an eyebrow. "I didn't make a joke. I asked a question, based on corroborated testimony from people who had no reason to lie and everything to lose. If folks find it funny, maybe ask yourself why the truth sounds like satire." In that moment, she wasn't just a congresswoman anymore. She was a political presence, a name people were Googling, a face voters were suddenly remembering. She was confident, collected, and unbothered by the spectacle. Her staff was overwhelmed with interview requests. Every outlet wanted her. Podcasts, radio, even late-night hosts were scrambling to book her. But Crockett was careful. She declined more than half of the offers, opting instead to speak where she felt the message wouldn't get buried under flashy graphics or empty noise. One of the standout moments came during an interview with NPR's Weekend Roundtable. The host asked, "What do you think people connected with the most in that hearing?" Crockett thought for a second, then said, "I think people are tired of being talked down to. They're tired of theatrics. They want someone to say what they're thinking without yelling, without trying to be viral. Just honest, even if it stings." Listeners called in by the dozens afterward. Many didn't even ask questions. They just wanted to say thank you. A retired postal worker from Pittsburgh said, "You reminded me of Barbara Jordan, calm, strong, clear. That's leadership." A teacher from Wichita added, "I played the hearing in class. My students asked more questions about civic duty in 1 hour than they have all semester." Crockett didn't flinch from the praise, but she didn't bask in it either. She told her team the attention was temporary, but the message had to last. That week, donations to her re-election campaign hit record highs. But more notable than the money was the demographic of new supporters. 60% were under the age of 35, and most had never donated to a political campaign before. "I wasn't planning on donating to anyone," one college student wrote in the comments of her campaign post. "But that hearing made me realize not all politicians are just noise. You earned it." In Memphis, a group of community organizers started a campaign they called Speak Like Crockett, encouraging high school students to practice formal debate by watching her hearing footage. And in Dallas, her hometown, a local artist painted a mural of her in downtown's Deep Ellum district. No words, just her likeness and a quote, "Every line affects 330 million people." It wasn't a movement, not yet, But something was shifting. Behind closed doors, Democratic strategists were suddenly asking if she might be ready for a leadership role, maybe not this year, but soon. Her name started appearing in op-eds as someone to watch, but Crockett wasn't chasing any of that. In a private moment with her chief of staff, she made it plain, "I didn't come to Congress to be a star. I came to be a mirror. If people don't like what they see when I hold it up, that's not my problem, that's the country's." But just as her voice was gaining national weight, the pushback was preparing to hit in this time. It wasn't just words. By Friday morning, the retaliation machine had kicked into gear. It started quietly, anonymous sources planting whispers in conservative media circles. There are questions about Congresswoman Crockett's conduct. One article teased, another hinted. She had violated committee protocol during the hearing, although they couldn't cite how. It wasn't about facts. It was about planting seeds. On Saturday, National Representative Clyde Henshaw of Arkansas, an old guard Republican known for his fondness for procedural tricks, announced on the House floor that he was filing a formal complaint to censure Representative Crockett. The resolution accused her of demeaning the dignity of the presidency and engaging in personal attacks unbecoming of a sitting member of Congress. Cable news snapped it up immediately, with conservative anchors framing it as a necessary move to restore order. One even called her a disgrace in a power suit, but this wasn't 2003. The country had changed, and so had the conversation. By Sunday morning, Crockett stood at the podium of her district office in Dallas, in front of more reporters than she'd ever seen packed into that narrow space. She didn't read from a script or hide behind notes. She just looked out across the room and started talking. "The censure isn't about civility. It's about control. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make personal threats. I asked the president to explain contradictions that concern the American people. And now they want to punish me for doing my job." Her voice never rose. Her pace never sped up. She wasn't grandstanding. She was just tired of the performance everyone else seemed to be putting on. "I was elected to speak plainly, not to make power comfortable," she said. A local reporter called out, "Do you regret bringing up his marriage or the health rumors?" Crockett looked right at him. If he doesn't want people questioning his honesty, maybe he should stop lying. If he doesn't want people questioning his health, maybe he should stop hiding it. That moment aired on every news channel, and the next hour, even networks that had previously dodged the story played the clip. She wasn't just defending herself, she was calling out the game, and people were listening. But on Capitol Hill, the gloves were coming off. The following Monday, the censure resolution made it to the floor. The vote was called, and the final tally was 214 in favor, 216 against. It failed, barely. The swing votes came from a small group of moderate Republicans, most of whom had received overwhelming pressure from their constituents. One of them, Representative Martin Cordell of Idaho, explained his vote on the House steps. "I don't agree with how she said it, but I respect that she said it, and I respect that she did it without shouting." Crockett didn't celebrate. She walked out of the chamber with the same pace she'd walked in, calm, measured. But her team could feel that the tide had held. Later that evening, in a private team meeting, her senior advisor asked, "Do you want to respond with a statement?" She shook her head. "No, let them wear it. They brought it to the floor, and the people rejected it. That's the statement." But while Congress was battling censure votes, her popularity was breaking ceilings. Town halls filled to capacity, and people waited in lines just to hear her speak. At a community event in Tulsa, a teenage girl stood up during Q&A and said, "You made me believe I could speak up, even when I'm the only one in the room who looks like me." Crockett didn't cry, but she reached out, took the girl's hand, and said, "If they don't give you space, take it. If they don't give you the mic, stand closer to it. Never wait for permission to speak truth." That line ended up in newspapers the next day. Her critics kept pushing, claiming she was too confrontational, to focus on drama, and not bipartisan enough. But none of it stuck because people had already seen the video. They'd seen the facts. They'd watched her sit quietly while the president lost control. In fact, every attempt to silence her only made her louder, not in volume, but in impact. Crockett wasn't interested in revenge. She had something bigger on her mind, and she was about to make that very clear to the country. A week after the hearing, Crockett stood alone at the podium of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library in Boston. She'd been invited to speak at an annual forum on leadership and public service. It wasn't a rally. There were no applause, signs, No standing ovations on cue, just rows of seats filled with policy students, historians, veterans, journalists, and everyday Americans who were still trying to process what they'd witnessed on live TV just days earlier. When she stepped up to speak, the room was hushed. People expected fire. She gave them something else. "I've had a lot of microphones in front of me this week," she began, "and most of them wanted to talk about the moment, what was said, how it went viral, how it played on TV. But I came here today because I want to talk about what comes after the moment." She paused, letting the silence settle. We are living in a time where it's easier to perform leadership than to practice it, easier to manage headlines than to manage truth. And I think the danger of that is we start measuring success by attention, not by service. It wasn't a rebuke. It was a mirror held up not to the president alone, but to everyone, herself included. Accountability is not an attack. Transparency is not cruelty. Asking questions of the most powerful man in the country doesn't make you disrespectful, it makes you responsible. The audience leaned in. It wasn't a soundbite moment. It was something more rare, truth that was hard to argue with. She told the crowd about the night after the hearing, how she went home, took off her shoes, sat on the edge of her bed, and didn't feel triumphant, just heavy. People kept calling it a victory, she said, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like what happens when you say something everyone knows is true, but no one wants to admit out loud. Then she took a breath and shifted her tone. "I didn't enjoy putting the president in that position, but I did what I had to do because we've spent too long tiptoeing around dysfunction, too long avoiding the hard conversations because we're scared of making things too political. But silence doesn't protect democracy. Truth does." A man in the back row coughed. A woman up front wiped something from her eye. Crockett continued, her voice low and steady. "I'm not interested in being famous. I'm interested in making sure no kid watching the hearing ever thinks that courage looks like yelling and fear looks like questions." The line hit hard, not in a headline-grabbing way, but in a way that made people look at each other. She spoke about public service, what it should be, how politics wasn't supposed to be theater, but had become one, and how slowly we've all started judging leaders by their performances instead of their values. "I want people to know that it's okay to ask questions, to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when your voice shakes, and especially when the room is quiet." The applause didn't come until she stopped speaking, but when it did, it was real, not because she tore anyone down, but because she made people feel like something could still be salvaged. That politics didn't have to be an endless performance. That maybe, just maybe, dignity could win again. Later that night, when asked by a reporter how she was handling the pressure, she replied, "Pressure only cracks what's hollow." Her words began circulating again, but this time, it wasn't about viral moments, it was about values. Editorials came in from both sides of the aisle. One conservative columnist wrote, "You don't have to agree with her politics to admit she reminded the country what integrity under fire actually looks like." A former ambassador tweeted, "Crockett didn't humiliate the presidency. She reminded it of its responsibility." That quote landed on the front page of the Oregon Tribune the next day. It was no longer just about the hearing, the meltdown, or the headlines. It was about something bigger. But Crockett knew that moments pass, and if you want them to matter, you have to make sure they leave something behind. 2 weeks after the hearing, Crockett sat across from a reporter in a small community radio station in Dayton, Ohio. No cameras, no stylists, no curated sound bites, just a room with bad carpet, a static-filled mic, and a quiet kind of honesty that national networks often forget. The reporter, middle-aged and soft-spoken, leaned in. "You've become something of a symbol for people tired of the noise, for folks who just want someone to tell the truth without making it a war. Do you feel that pressure?" Crockett took a long pause before she answered. "I don't feel pressure to be a symbol," she said. "I feel responsibility to stay human. Symbols don't get tired. People do." She glanced down at her hands, then back up. "The night after that hearing, I had dinner alone, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to think. Not about the cameras or the headlines. I thought about a woman who sent me an email after. She said she'd never spoken up at work when her boss crossed the line because she didn't think she had the right. And after watching me sit in that room and not back down, she said she'd found her voice." She shook her head, almost smiling. "That's what stays with me, not the noise, not the spin. The one person who saw something in herself that she hadn't seen before." The reporter nodded but said nothing. He let the silence stretch, respectful. Then he asked, "If you could say one thing to the president now off the record, no cameras, what would it be?" Crockett didn't hesitate. "I'd tell him he still has a choice," she said. "He can keep performing, keep yelling, keep hiding behind pride, or he can stop pretending and be honest with the country. That kind of honesty is brutal, but it's freeing." There was something quiet in her tone, not spite, not triumph, just the kind of clarity that only comes when you've looked power in the eye and didn't blink. By the end of that week, she returned to Washington, back to long committee meetings, flow votes, and inboxes full of angry emails and grateful letters. The noise had died down, but the shift remained. She walked through the Capitol now, and staffers who once barely nodded said her name with respect. Constituents came up to her at airports, not just to thank her, but to ask real questions about policy, leadership, and truth. One man at Reagan National handed her a handwritten note. It simply said, "You made silence less comfortable. Thank you." And maybe that was the real legacy of that hearing, not the viral clip, not the outburst, not even the political fallout. It was the quiet courage that reminded people watching at home that truth doesn't have to shout to be heard. That strength isn't in the slam of a hand or the raise of a voice, but in the stillness that stands its ground while power stumbles. And that's the kind of leadership we need more of, people who don't run toward attention, but don't run from the moment either. People who are willing to speak plainly even when the room is full of cameras. People who understand that holding someone accountable doesn't mean humiliating them, it means asking the questions others are too scared to say out loud. So if there's anything to take from Jasmine Crockett's confrontation with the president, it's this: decency isn't weakness, clarity isn't cruelty, and calm truth can shake the room louder than any shout. Now more than ever, our country needs that kind of courage, not just in Congress, but in classrooms, in boardrooms, in living rooms. It needs people willing to speak up even if their voice shakes, even if they're the only one, even if it's uncomfortable, because silence doesn't fix anything, speaking up might. If you believe in that kind of courage, in clarity, in honesty, in leadership that doesn't perform but actually leads, then don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come.